Hi, and welcome to this installment of Frank and Mary here in Nantucket. If you haven't seen the show before, my name is Art Bergeron. I'm an elder law attorney. I work at a large firm. I do elder law presentations at the Salt Marsh, and those are often on TV, but the purpose of these shows is not to talk about law, which is what I talk about at the Salt Marsh, but really to talk about my friends Frank and Mary. I often talk about Frank and Mary and their kids, Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr., and I tell people Frank and Mary's goal in life, maybe like your goal in life, is to stay in their house until they die and be buried in the backyard. And the question, if you're living in Nantucket, is how do you do that? Who are the people and what are the programs that you need to know about so that you can stay at home until you die, and so that if for some reason you can't stay at home, either because it's just too much hassle, right, or it's really not safe at home, you know about the other options so that you can stay in Nantucket. Because if you're in Nantucket, especially in the winter, it's because you know you want to be on Nantucket, right? And you don't want to be other places. So I asked to join me my friend Tish Coull, whom I had met at the Senior Expo a couple of years ago,
Yes.
and then did the tour with you at the Homestead.
That's right.
And you've been at the Homestead for a long time, because I wanted you folks to kind of get a sense of it, because of course everybody here has walked by it like a billion times, right?
Right.
But how many of those people have actually walked in the door, right? So to start off with, I just wanted to talk a little bit about you. So I know in an earlier show I had interviewed a woman named Erin Kopecki, who's new here, right? You told me you're old here. You've been here for a long time. So can you just kind of talk about that a little bit, and how where you were, how you came to be still here?
Okay. Well, I was born here, went to school here, and then
because your maiden name was?
My maiden name was Simmons.
Was Simmons,
Yes.
Right. So you grew up here on the island, and by the way, you told me your dad is still here part of the year?
Yep, he's still here part of the year.
And that your mother's family she's passed away, but your mother's family was here for a million.
Right,
right,
yeah,
for a
the
million
Snow family.
The Snow family's
Yep,
here for a
there's
million
a long
generations.
history there,
Yeah.
yes.
So you grew up here.
Yep, grew up here,
Yep.
and then after high school went to nursing school in Boston.
Yeah.
Came back and worked at the Cottage Hospital for a year.
Yeah.
Then moved back up to the Boston area for 10 years.
Yeah.
Yep, and did a couple of different types of nursing there.
Yeah.
And
Were you
then
working in hospitals, or were you
I
working
was working
private?
in hospitals.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Doing some
that's gotta be a pretty-
orthopedics and psychiatry, med surg.
All kinds of
All
stuff.
kinds of stuff.
And there's a
Yeah.
lot of hospitals, right?
There's a lot of
Yeah.
hospitals.
So,
Yeah.
what made you decide to come back? Because if you're a nurse, I mean, that's kind of like that's like heaven for nurses, right? Is the Boston, because there's a jillion jobs and there's all the big institutions and stuff.
It was a great place to work.
Yeah.
But Nantucket was a great place to work too. And part of the drawback here was I have a daughter who I was thinking it was hard looking at schools, being bussed around to different districts.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Sometimes very far from
I see.
where we lived.
Because the daughter was little when you were
Right, she
I see, when you
was
were back there.
smaller, yes. And my parents were still here, so I still had that family draw.
Yeah. So you
Yeah.
came back.
So I came back here in
and-
1990.
Yes,
Yep.
and raised your daughter here.
Yes.
So just
Yep.
to ask, is the daughter still here, or did
No,
she?
she just left. She just left actually this past year.
Oh, really?
And
So
she
she
moved
re-
down to North Carolina.
Oh,
yeah.
but she stayed for a long time, right?
She did.
Yeah.
She did. She loves it here.
Oh, so
she would like to be here, but it's housing. The housing is an
hard.
issue. Yeah.
It's just so hard. I mean, I talk to people about this all the time. I mean, on the one hand, it's very exciting to know you're a millionaire if you bought a house in the early 90s and all of a sudden the values just kind of went up,
Right,
you know?
right.
But on the other hand, I mean, I talk especially folks who've got a lot of kids, because it's like, how, on the one hand, you want one of your kids to have the house, but on the other hand, they can never afford to buy everybody else out.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
it's just, the houses are so it's really hard. It's just really hard.
It is.
So anyway, she's in North Carolina.
Yeah.
You're still here.
I'm still here, yes.
And in the meantime, you came back. You started working at Cottage Hospital, right? At Nantucket Cottage Hospital. And for how long did you do that?
Well, I was at Cottage Hospital before I left, actually.
Oh, that's right. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, and then I came back and worked for the Nantucket Counseling Service at Fairgrounds House, which is a residential program for those with chronic mental illnesses. And I worked there for several years, and then
And once again, you know, I'm from out of town. So is Fairgrounds House still there?
Fairgrounds House is still there. Yes.
This is
Yep.
great. It's like nothing ever stops, right? These places just go. So you worked there for a while.
Worked there for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then did some random things. I did some bookkeeping for a while.
Yeah.
And then the position of assistant director became available at the Homestead.
At the Homestead. And you've been there ever since.
And I've been there ever since.
So tell us about the Homestead.
The Homestead
A little
is-
talk about the history of the Homestead, and now you've been there for 10 years. So how it was when you came, how it's changed, what it's like, who should really look at it? Who should really look? Because I remember walking into the Homestead, and I remember finding myself saying, this reminds me of like some senior living places that I knew about as a kid, you know, that felt very much like a kind of a, you know, a home where, a home, a real home, like like an old age home for folks who are older and don't feel like dealing with some of the stuff of dealing with your own house and all of that. So anyway, tell us about what it was, the history and kind of what it is and where you see it kind of going.
Oh, sure. The Homestead, actually, we're approaching our 100th year of incorporation. It was incorporated in 1919.
Wow.
And
Wow, so it's next year, it's 100 years.
Next year, it's 100 years, yes. There was a sort of a grassroots committee of people who just worked for 10 years to raise funds. And they purchased that home on 115 Main Street, where we are now.
Yeah, and it's always been there?
It's always been there, yep.
Yeah.
And they purchased it in 1929 and opened in 1930, and it's been running there ever since.
And is it a nonprofit?
It's a private
operates this?
nonprofit.
I get it.
That's it. No state or federal funding.
No, so you really none. So you're there purely with you know local support and
local support
and the folks
our
that
rents
it can pay.
and
Yeah. So it's been going for a long time.
It's been going for a long time.
And you still have a nonprofit board and all that jazz.
Yes, we
right?
do. Yes.
And so when you came 10 years ago, so who was there? Who can you kind of describe? You know who was there and who is there now, right? In terms of why they came, right? And what you and therefore what you offer, right?
Right. Well, again, it's an independent housing situation. It's a choice for people who feel like they either can't or don't want to manage their own homes. And all the hassles that sometimes come with ownership and repairs and expenses.
Oh yeah, there's a million.
There's a million.
Like you say, just raking the leaves and shoveling the snow and doing the shopping, and there's just a million things.
There's always something, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. I think part of the biggest draw, I think, for the Homestead is the companionship, the socialization. You know, the fact that it's 13 resident rooms.
13
with
rooms.
one night supervisor.
Yeah.
So there's 14 rooms. So it's a small group, and they're all the same age. So they know what each other knows. So they can relate to things in their past. You know, and it's nice to, have a conversation with someone who knows what you know.
And that's a great point. And who kind of remembers some of the things that you remember, so that you can kind of put it in context.
Right.
So is there an age limit? Is there a minimum age?
There's
for
a
being at the
minimum age
Homestead?
of 65. But the age of people coming in is much older than that.
Typically, even when they get there, even when they start,
they're in their 80s, and I think that sort of has changed. I've seen that the age of admission increase as I've been there.
Yeah. And why do you think that is?
I
didn't
think
mean to
because
interrupt
it's okay. I think because people are just living longer.
Yeah.
They are more well. They're more active. They're healthier. They're able to be at home independently without issues for longer.
Just for a longer time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I suppose when I'm thinking about that conversation with Erin Kopecki, also that the what I'll call the infrastructure, or kind of the people infrastructure that can allow you to stay home has really kind of evolved too, in terms of home care workers that didn't exist
Right.
10 or 15
Right.
years ago, or I don't
There's
know.
a lot of different services, elder services, and lots of organizations out there for people to reach out to for more assistance and more
assistance.
support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as you say, the population itself is also getting older.
That's
and so
right.
although there may be less younger people living there, the total number of people who are in their 80s or over 75
Is increasing.
And I saw some numbers, I think, for you and for people on the other, we'll call the other island, right?
Yes.
And I saw the numbers for, I think it was population over 65 in like 2030 or 2040, and it was like 30% of the population or over 25% of the population. It's
Right.
gigantic, right?
Right, it is gigantic.
Yeah.
I mean, at the Homestead, just in our little group, there are several people over the age of 90
Really.
who are very well.
But right, they're still so, and they came. Can you give me an example of why somebody would have come? No, I want to talk about particular names for anybody.
Sure. There's a couple of different scenarios.
Yeah.
Some of our residents will have lived elsewhere and are coming to Nantucket to be closer to their children. Their children live here, and they're
I see.
feeling a little unsure about having their parent alone. It's maybe not such a good situation. They just want to be closer. So that's one scenario.
Yeah, and are these people who had the seniors who had originally been from Nantucket or had originally been from off island?
Not necessarily. I think in both cases, but a lot of people who have not been residents here, but who have been here for visiting their children.
But they're very aware, and I guess so. That's really common among clients of mine. So I think probably the most in my community, I remember when I was younger, I did permitting work also as well as doing elder law, and I had permitted the first of the assisted living communities in our community in Marlborough. And I remember when we were talking about it, we were all assuming, I and the other city councilors and stuff, that this was primarily going to get populated by older people who were from Marlborough, because it was assisted living was for a couple hundred people, community's 38,000, a lot of seniors. We figured that'd be the natural place. Now looking at it 20 years later, because I'm so old, that I've actually seen these places change over time. 20 years later, less than half of that population is from Marlborough.
It's from Marlborough, yeah.
All of the others, though, all of those people not from Marlborough have somebody that have a child in Marlborough or have a child that's really close. And that's the point. They don't want to go live with their kids, right? I mean, some people that works out just grand.
Right.
But sometimes not because they have grandchildren and this or that, or because it's just too much hassle. The living kind of arrangement is just too hard, or there isn't another bathroom or another kitchen. So, for any number of reasons, they want to be close.
Right.
And you want to know if there's an emergency, if there's a problem, that somebody can come over, and so it works out perfectly, right? So that's a great. So that's one scenario. You got people from off that came on.
Yep. And the other scenario is people who have lived in their houses here for quite some time and are deciding that it's not feasible anymore for any number of reasons, whether it's health reasons or financial or just loneliness, isolation.
Right, which I think is once again another just a common thing. And my friends Frank and Mary, they'll tell you they'll tell you what they tell me. They don't talk to they don't talk to everybody. They'll tell me and their kids that they want to live in their house until they die. But the problem is that their house is in a neighborhood, and over time that neighborhood changes, right? And so their house was in a neighborhood, and they knew everybody. Right. In many cases, they raised their kids in that neighborhood with everybody else, but now everybody else is gone, and none of their family is in that neighborhood. So there aren't those other people to talk to, right? Yeah. And they just get more. And the neighborhood was on a cul-de-sac because this was the '60s or the '70s, or it was out of town. And so to get to anything from there is a real pain, and there's snow and there's all that other jazz, right?
Yeah, the weather is big. The weather's big
really
here.
big. Yeah.
Loss of power,
And if you're not like right downtown here in the winter, you're kind of nowhere. I mean,
Right.
things are really quiet.
Yeah, it's hard to get around.
And things are really quiet outside of the
Right.
center.
And
So,
we have a generator too, so that
Oh.
takes care of things. The heat always goes.
the heat's always,
Yeah.
yeah. And so what do you offer? Tell me let me put it this way. Tell me what a typical day would be like at the homestead.
Well, a lot of the activities revolve around the meal time.
Sure.
So, breakfast in the morning, which is pretty much everyone's favorite. People sort of come as they can. They can have anything that they would like.
Yeah. Because you have a chef that just
We have a chef.
makes stuff to order.
Yep. Chris Roberts is our chef.
That's really
he's
handy.
wonderful. And the other girls, Jen Killen works there in the kitchen as well,
Yeah.
and they'll make whatever you ask for.
And I suppose that's the thing about having that kind of scale, right? That if you're that
Because
small,
they can. Yes.
you're that small, and you can, and not only that, you kind of know what people.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it the usual? Right.
Often it's this. You can pretty much
Right.
predict.
Right. It's the same as
Yes.
the Dunkin' Donuts. Well, I know there's no Dunkin'. back in America, my Dunkin' Donuts lady, she not only knows my order, but everybody in line. But it's
Yeah.
just because you're seeing
It's
the
just
same
'cause you
people,
see them,
right?
yes.
So that's
Yeah.
really handy. So you can get.
So, yeah.
Are the hours limited? Like you have to show up for breakfast for a particular time?
You have to be to breakfast between 7:30 and 9. So
I see.
there's
So there's quite a bit of
there's
time.
quite a leeway
Yep.
there.
Yep.
And then folks usually go read the newspaper.
Yeah.
Get ready for the day.
Yeah. Now, are currently of the people who are there, do most of those folks still have the ability to leave, to get, kind of go down the stairs and take a walk, or are many of them really constrained in terms of their ability to do that?
Taking a walk can be somewhat hazardous.
Can be challenging.
The sidewalks are not.
Come on, in Nantucket, the sidewalks are a little bumpy, right?
A little bumpy.
How about those
A
cobblestones?
little bumpy, yes.
So the first time I brought my my paralegal, I started coming to the islands because my paralegal's from the other island, right? And we would do seminars there. And then somebody said, "Oh, you should go over to the salt marsh." So we came over to do one. And the first time we came over, right, we flew over, and then we rented a car and we're driving downtown on one of the cobblestone streets. And she was like, "These streets are terrible. We don't have these kinds of streets in Martha's Vineyard. This is why this island's no good." It's like it's so great. It's so great.
Yeah.
To have two communities who you could see had played football against each other for way too long, and maybe those will start healing now that the football teams are evaporating, But there's all of that. So anyway, the cobblestones were quite a shock when I first came. Right?
We have a nice patio area out back, so a lot of the folks will just go out back, and there's Howard Street, which is a little side street that sometimes can be quiet, where it's flatter and it's easier for folks to walk. A lot of our residents have assistive devices.
Assistive device, like walkers?
Yeah, walkers and rollators
I get it.
and canes. So,
but to actually have some space right downtown. And by the way, just to remind, but what is your address?
115 Main Street.
115 Main Street. And by the way, when we do the show, can you get the information for these folks so they can kind of have a banner so that we can get like the calling information and all that jazz? Okay, so people will, they'll start their day and they'll read the paper and they'll kind of relax and stuff and they do stuff.
Then there's the big meal of the day is noon.
Is noontime, yeah.
So everyone eats in the dining room. So everyone eats together. So it's a social event, really.
Yeah, and there's enough room for that.
There's enough room for that. Yes.
That's great. That's great. And so do folks come and visit often? Do you see?
Oh yes, yeah. A lot of the families are here and they visit. Some visit daily.
And I suppose that's one of the advantages, right? That you got folks who are really around. So if they were moving here to be close.
It's close. It's easy to get to. A lot of people will stop on their way to work, on their way home from work. Just checking in.
Just checking in.
Just checking in.
It's funny because that also reminds me of the uniqueness of the nursing home, the uniqueness of our island home, right? I remember the first time I walked into our island home, the door wasn't working, right? So the kind of the slit. Maybe I'm not supposed to say that, but the power door, you had to kind of like.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I guess there was a button, but I didn't realize that. So I kind of opened the door, and I was like, I don't know about this, right? But then you go in, and it just feels homey. It just feels homey, and people kind of know each other, you know, and you're walking around, and it's like you're describing. People have been here forever. Families come and visit. Just the opposite of these big institutional places where I often go.
Right.
And when you're describing the Homestead, I mean, I'm thinking of kind of some much larger places, and I think the place that here, Sherburne Commons, is more kind of to scale. It's a smaller place, you know. But you go to these places that got hundreds of units, you know.
Right.
And you got a grand chandelier, and you got all of this other stuff in the in the big foyer, which is just there to protect, you know, to impress the kids, right? But there isn't that sense of a kind of a community there,
right?
Which you can get from being at kind of that scale, right?
Right. You can. It's just a sort of a feeling that you get when you come into the Homestead. It's the building itself is great.
Yeah.
It's well maintained. Each room is very individualized. They have their own characteristics.
And I bet some people have been in their room for a long time.
Some people have.
Right.
Yeah.
So where do you see the Homestead going? I know that at the Elder Expo. So the next table to me was one of your board members from the Homestead.
Oh yes.
Blonde-haired lady. I know I can't remember, but I don't remember names. She was wonderful, but she was really selling. He was really talking about the Homestead. And then there was a guy that came who was a real estate broker, whose name I don't remember.
Michael Angelastro.
Yeah,
yes.
Michael Angelastro. I was going to say Italian name.
Right. He's one of our board of directors.
Yes. As I mentioned to you before the show, so I never could remember names.
Yeah.
But before I didn't have an excuse. Now I'm just an old person. So I'm like, hey, I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm old, right? So anyway, they were talking about, they're kind of fundraising and stuff, and kind of and plans for the future. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Well, sure. The Homestead it's an older building. It's a beautiful building. It's a very large Victorian home.
It's as historic as you can get.
It is as historic as you can get, and it requires a lot of love and maintenance fairly constantly, and it's very costly. So right now we're currently doing a little kitchen remodel, sprucing things up, and just trying to keep up with changes that people need to be comfortable, and for the staff to work more efficiently and effectively, and for the residents to be as comfortable and as happy as they can be.
And I suppose just keeping up with the old building as well as doing kind of new stuff.
Right. I mean, we have one of the big issues for the residents is we have a great big huge furnace, a great big house, and radiators. So there's very little individual control over the heat, because it's one thermostat controls a big part of that building. So it's hard for the first and second floor to communicate with each other in terms of needs. And so
are you thinking of actually, because that would be a big number, right?
It would be a big
changing
number.
The system, but at the same time, that now you're, in terms of what you're giving people a much more individualized control over their environment.
Right. Or even just looking at the feasibility of what we can do. Do we need another furnace? Do we need to split open the heating system? Can we just run individual thermostats to some of our rooms?
Right. But figuring that,
to give them more control. But those are some of the things, because
once you figure it out,
exactly,
there's going to be a price tag involved. So I have to ask.
Yes.
You thought about an elevator?
Yes, we have thought about an elevator.
It's a great building.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember I was talking to Mr. Angelastro.
Yes, that's on our list.
Yeah, and I kind of, because as I was talking about just how the price for those has gone down so much, because once again, my old day job, a lot of my work was doing real estate. I've always dealt with a lot of real estate folks, and now I deal with there's a wonderful woman. So it's in the mainland, so there's enough population to support this. There's a woman and her husband. She's called the nurse carpenter, right? And they will actually, her day job was as a nurse, but they'll actually go in and evaluate people's houses to make them accessible, depending on what their needs are, right? And as things as small as the doorknobs and some other stuff, or as big as the elevator, because as they said, people still think that an elevator is a, $200,000. How can you do an elevator?
Right.
But it's much, much less expensive than that now. And suddenly it can make the home accessible. And for the people you've described, I would think your market really expands.
Right.
If you know that people can take the elevator to the second floor, right?
Well, we do have a stair chair right now.
I've seen that.
So we do have a way for people to, safely, transport from the first to second floor. But we have talked about an elevator. It's just, that would be another big, yeah.
But that's a price.
Right.
But I suppose, once again, what's nice about what you're doing is that it's controlled by a nonprofit. It's like the Island Home that way. One of the things that makes the Island Home special is that people aren't looking to the bottom line. They know that they can't lose money. As I always would tell people, the fact that you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you're a loss, right? No, what a difference between a nonprofit and a profit is where the profit goes. If you're a nonprofit, the profit stays in the company, right? You can't lose money, right?
Goes right back into the building.
But having it that way means you're not constantly having to figure out, there aren't efficiency people coming in all the time saying, oh, that's a kind of a waste, how come you, using the real maple syrup instead of the, right? So you've got, and it gives you credibility, in terms of reaching out to folks saying, we're looking for a donation really for you. Because when you're contributing to something for folks who are older, you're basically just contributing to yourself when you're older, right? It's like you're making sure that there are options there that in the absence of those options, you might not be able to stay.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, so anyway, I know that's because both of those folks had talked about the fact. I'm so embarrassed I can't remember that lady's name. Oh my God. So
Kristen, was it Kristen Campbell?
It might be. And her husband does stuff at the hospital.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was terrific. I mean, they were like so up on the stuff that you're doing, right? And kind of excited about it. And they were both saying, there needs to be that balance, and also structuring things so that you're kind of available to a larger senior population in the future, right? Some of those changes, so that just as a marketing matter, it's just easier to, but obviously those things those are expensive to do up front, but then ideally the payoff is that you're there for another 100 years.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
So now you're a nurse, you told me.
I am a nurse by training.
So do you find yourself having to do that sometimes when you're there? Because I would think that'd be an added benefit. That if there's an emergency,
even
there's
though
somebody that knows, right?
Yeah, I'm not employed as a nurse there, but I am a nurse.
Yeah, but a
so
nurse
I
is a
can look
nurse.
at something perhaps the way a nurse does,
Exactly.
versus someone who is not a nurse.
Right. You're going to spot a potential emergency in a way different from what a kind of normal person would see.
Yes.
Right. So that's kind of that's a wonderful thing. Now, do you still do any nursing outside of the homestead?
I do some nursing for Anodyne on a part-time basis. Doing some things in the community with some of the seniors.
And Anodyne's been here for quite a while now too, right?
Anodyne has been here for quite some time. Yeah.
So and once again, while they provide a lot of home care that is like non-nursing, I would think having nurses not only kind of to figure out what's going on in those homes, but also to kind of supervise that must be just really important.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Just kind of
I think the nursing agencies provide a great service to people who want to stay at the home. And Elder Services does coordinate some of those services through, they subcontract through Anodyne to get some of their clients' needs met.
I see.
Grocery shopping, homemaking,
the basic stuff,
and also personal care.
And Frank and Mary want to stay home, right?
And Frank and Mary want to stay home.
Now, do any of those folks provide any services when they come in? Do any of those folks come to the homestead?
Yes. Yes, we do have.
So that you've got folks,
individuals.
and you're providing the basic things at the homestead, kind of the room and board and socialization and stuff. But if you need more, there are other folks that come in to help out.
That's right. Yes, we don't do the personal care aspect of it. So yes, those agencies come in and provide that support to our residents.
And once again, I've always talked about the fact that there are things that each of the islands can learn from each other. The Vineyard doesn't have this. Vineyard doesn't have this kind of really warm, small scale house. Well, I shouldn't say, there's a place called the Henrietta Brewer House, but it's like a little bit larger, right? But for people who just want to feel that they're not at home, but they're at home.
Right.
It's a great alternative.
I think it's a wonderful option.
It's a great
very
option.
Unique, yes.
So listen, thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. As I say, just to help people, if nothing else, to increase the number of people who walk by, and now they actually know your face, so they're not going to say, "Oh, I don't want to go in there." Just to get them a sense of it.
Right.
So that, not even if you need it now, right? But so that you know if there's an emergency, right? And for some reason you can't go home, that this is really an option. So thank you very much for this. And I know that you'll be sending some information so that they can do like a banner so they can give you the homestead information and stuff. Thank you very much for doing this. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you do stop in at the homestead just to see it. You don't want to be going to any place but at your home if in an emergency. You want to know ahead of time what your options are. This is a great option that's unique to Nantucket. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on the next installment of Frank and Mary in Nantucket. Thank you.